This evening, Pat, is there one who adheres closest to your conception of classic conservatism?
I think the closest, candidly, is probably Ron Paul.
But I got to tell you, I have never seen so many viewer emails urging us to get a candidate on our air as I have with this particular gentleman. Our mailbox is consistently flooded with these requests.
Republican presidential candidate Rudy Giuliani is being assigned some summer reading. Fellow candidate, 9-term congressman from Texas, Ron Paul, thinks the former mayor of New York City needs to bone up on U.S. policy in the Middle East. You might not be too familiar with Paul.
This is your opportunity to talk with the man that I will be supporting for president.
Welcome to the Freedom Revolution.
I watched the Republican debate, and I saw this guy, Ron Paul. He's my new hero.
Start the clock.
What he was saying was we should listen to our enemies. We would actually make ourselves safer. You just never heard this logic from someone who's actually going to run the country. Got Ben Affleck here. They're screaming for Ron Paul.
Congressman Ron Paul's presidential exploratory campaign got underway on Friday, February 23rd, when Dr. Paul and campaign manager Kent Snyder arrived in Manchester, New Hampshire for events and meetings that would hopefully gauge the viability of a presidential campaign for the 2008 election. The first stop was WMUR Channel 9 for a live studio audience taping of Meet the Candidates, a mandatory stop in the campaign trail.
This is the first event in New Hampshire, well actually in the country, where Dr. Paul is going to publicly talk about his potential bid as a presidential candidate. Mm-hmm. So what better place to do it in than New Hampshire? When I was told that these are coveted seats, that people do enjoy coming here and asking the candidates questions. So I'm eager to see how energetic they are with the questions. I anticipate they will be.
Individual liberty and voluntarism solves problems about 100 times better than the giant bureaucracy.
Congressman, let's go online here for a moment as we are online. We asked you to send us some questions via the email, and our first question comes from Stuart A. Smith of Orange. Stuart, thanks for sending this in. Congressman Paul, please state your position on the North American Union. Congressman?
The North American Union is something not a whole lot of people know about, and they should, because it's coming. It's an outgrowth of the NAFTA agreement. I believe in free trade. I consider myself one of the strongest free traders in Washington. But I don't like managed trade. And what they call free trade under NAFTA and WTO and all these organizations, that's managed trade by international government for the benefit of big corporations. So I'm positively opposed to that. So I'm opposed to NAFTA, and the outgrowth of NAFTA is the North American Union with a unified currency, the Amero. They already have a plan for a highway running from Mexico up to Canada, 12-lane highway with trains in the middle, and it's going to be an international highway. And there's been some secret funding already into our budgets to start this program moving. There's going to be eminent domain powers used to confiscate tens of thousands of acres to build this. So I still believe in America. I believe in the national sovereignty. I believe we should be out of the UN. I don't believe it serves our interests. I believe that we should be like the founders advised, be friends with people, trade and travel, and that's why we don't fight. We get along with Vietnam now because we trade with them. We get along with China now because we trade with them. But as soon as we talk about international government entangling alliances and military force out there, you end up with a mess. Matter of fact, those of us who talk this way, sometimes they say, oh yeah, you're just one of those old isolationists. But just think of what our policies have done in the last 15 or 20 years. We have become isolated from the world. We're diplomatic isolationists. We should be talking to people. So, not international government, no North American American Union, but quite willing to talk to Canadians and Mexicans and do whatever we can to facilitate trade and travel, but also protect our borders and protect our national sovereignty.
Congressman, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.
I really liked how he, his views, he's stuck on his views and he is not like a flip-flopper.
He's very articulate, very intriguing. I like his ideas, I like his individualism.
He seems like he knows what he wants and he sticks to it and he doesn't change his mind just because that's the popular thing to do.
He creates his own ideas. He doesn't really follow any particular line, whether it be a party line or any expectation that anybody has for him. And I definitely appreciate that. And I think young voters, I think independent voters, and people who want this country to go in another direction will generally appreciate that as well. So I was very impressed.
It's very different from other opinions from other candidates that we've seen.
I don't know whether he'll make it winning the primary, but I certainly hope so, and I'm willing to work for him.
He just supported every single view that I supported myself, which is very unusual in a politician when you see time and time again that this guy is always on the same side and never giving into party politics as much as you see most other people.
Years ago, the founding engineers built a train called Freedom and America got on board. But a pocket full of bankers, well, they made that train jump track. Now we need a leader who can get us back on course. Ron Paul, he's a driving that freedom train, so come on board. Well, she may have gone off track, but Ron Paul can bring her back. We're gonna hear that liberty whistle blow once more. $1 worth its weight in gold will help let freedom ring. And every penny that you make belongs to you. Let's bring our soldiers home and leave the other trains alone. Ron Paul Freedom Train will see us through.
As I thought about the real prospects of something like this happening the other day, I thought, God, you poor man. Suppose you got elected.
This is the whole thing. Somebody who truly believes as we do. We don't want the stupid job. It's the last thing we want. So I turn that around and I say, I want to be elected because I don't want to run your life. And I don't want to run the economy. And I don't want to police the world.
Presents The Charles Goyette Show. To speak with Charles, call 602-277-KFNX. That's 602-277-5369. And now, America's most independent talk show host. Here's Charles Goyette.
Good morning. Welcome to our show, 7:07 in the morning. I am Charles Goyette. I don't know if you remember the era. If you don't remember, your parents will certainly remember the era, the late 1970s, the early 1980s, kind of the economic dislocations that were going on at the time. We had a period in which you could watch the U.S. dollar falling like a stone. It was, and a congressman from Texas by the name of Ron Paul was serving on the House Banking Committee and distinguished himself immediately and called himself to the attention of people that were really alert and paying attention to what was going on in the United States Congress and with the Federal Reserve and about the economic dislocations that the nation was facing. He distinguished himself by speaking about it in the most clear possible terms, talking about why we were where we were and where we were going and what the alternatives were and what they would mean, the different choices, the forks in the road. And since that time, I have carefully watched Congressman Ron Paul, and he has been a fount of wisdom, of restraint, a voice for limited government, for the Constitution. He has voted only in favor of measures that are consistent with the requirements of the Constitution. Congressman Ron Paul has offered himself up as a Republican candidate for president. He is here in Arizona. We welcome him to our show. Congressman Paul, good of you to be here today.
Thank you very much. Good to be with you.
So how are you going to pull this off?
with your help, you're going to be my campaign manager.
Sure. I demand a recount too.
There you go. Well, I personally by myself can't pull it off. I'm really trying to find out whether there's enough people in this country who really believe in freedom and the Constitution. And to my surprise, there are more out there than I thought. So there has been a change in the last 30 years since I've been involved in politics, and there are a lot more people who realize that the problems that we faced in the 1970s was an isolated event, but it was just a preliminary to some of the problems that we still face. Because if you look at our budget and the entitlement system and the foreign policy, our conditions are actually a lot worse than they were in 79 and 80 when that precipitated interest rates of 21% and the many problems that we had with high unemployment rates. So the big question is are there enough people out there that care? And can I rally them? And that's yet to be seen. And it's difficult to raise enough money to really compete, but on the internet, I think we're able to reach a lot of people, and talk shows like this have been very, very helpful. Major media outlets generally aren't going to be available to us, but we live in a different age right now, and the internet changes not only yearly, but almost weekly on the new programs and availability of finding out where our supporters are.
But now, it's wide open. I mean, everybody can go to Ron Paul on the internet and find out what's going on with your campaign, the kind of support. If the major news media isn't reporting the kind of greeting that you received, for example, at Sky Harbor Airport last night, just on one campaign stop. I mean, I guarantee you the other presidential candidates aren't getting that kind of greeting.
Yeah, and you know that, who knows, somebody might stick that on YouTube or something, and there will be, tens of thousands, if not more, people will see this. And if you do that often enough, the media generally is pretty lazy. So if there's something of significant that keeps popping up, on the internet, lo and behold, they may be influenced as well.
Well, you can see now, if you don't agree with Congressman Paul about anything else, he's dead on about the media anyway.
Nice to see you, Ron.
Great to see you.
I served with Ron 76 and I got
so we overlap.
68, we overlapped. I came down and campaigned for you.
Right, I remember that very well.
As I recall, we had a swimming contest.
Yes, and I recall you beat me. You were getting ready to tell everybody that.
Well,
I was so embarrassed.
And in your own backyard.
Yeah, that's right.
But I want to say something, Ron. I served with you, and you were often the lone voice in the wilderness, in the halls of Congress, yet you had a lot of respect, and there was a lot more folks that listened to you than gave you credit. And there's so many, I think, in the Congress that believe like you do, but don't have the political guts to follow their own philosophy, what they truly feel is right. And I think it's important that you're running. I think it's important that your voice be heard. It makes people stop and think. And today we don't do that. We get so much of the same thing. It just like washes over us, and it's not what we want to hear, and it's not what we need to hear. And I just want to compliment you for doing this.
Thank you.
Welcome you to Arizona. You have done a lot of friends.
Appreciate that. That is very nice.
Listen to the freedom message. We're standing in line to shed the light of truth so America can find that freedom never left us. We simply closed our eyes. Liberty
is okay, except that we were told that the congressman was going to be on by 8:15, and now they're saying it's going to be after 8:30.
Freedom, we will lift our voice and let freedom ring.
A little later, I'll be speaking with Representative Ron Paul, but first, she was our 66th Secretary.
We betrayed our birthright and quenched the father's dream. It's not too late to speak the truth from sea to shining sea. We can find our way back home. Shout the message loud and clear.
Let's talk to somebody who's running for president on the Republican side. He represents Texas' 14th District in the U.S. House of Representatives. He wants to be the Republican nominee for president, the Honorable Ron Paul. Ron, how you doing?
Doing fine, thank you.
So, you are a throwback Republican because you are a true libertarian, right?
That is true. I believe in limited government. I believe in individual liberty, and there were some Republicans at one time that actually believed that.
I know, but you think we should get rid of the CIA?
Well, I think we could do without the CIA murdering leaders in different countries. I think there's room for intelligence gathering, but I don't like the secret activity of the CIA where they go about and getting rid of people like DM and others and installing governments. Our CIA was
But we're under attack by crazy Muslim fanatics. Don't you think, even if they're doing a bad job, it's better than no job at all? I would feel pretty naked without the CIA.
You'd feel naked, but you'd be a lot safer because you'd be less likely to be attacked by terrorists. I mean, our CIA was in operation getting rid of an elected leader of Iran in 1953, and they never forgot that. So that helped lead to the radicalization.
But Congress, what about global warming? Are you on the page that there is such a thing as global warming?
Yeah, I think it's been around for a long time, and it's probably going to be here with us for a while longer. I don't think the ozone has settled on that yet. I don't think everybody knows everything about global warming because you have reputable scientists on both sides of that argument.
Don't you think the government has to do something about global warming?
We go to war to protect oil so we can buy more oil, burn more oil. So I would say our foreign policy contributes to global warming by subsidizing a policy that is deeply flawed, and that's why we're in the Middle East to protect oil interests. So yes, that would be one of the first things you could do if you're serious.
What about the FAA? I mean, that does prevent planes from crashing into each other. It is government meddling in a sort of absolute sense, but don't you think we would need something like the FAA?
Sure, you could. You could have a private FAA and
a private FAA.
Of course, you didn't do a very good job with your FAA in preventing 4 aircrafts going down in the wrong places. Where if it had been private and you had not depended on the government for protection, you might not have had a rule that said you can't have a gun on an airplane and that you can't resist. So because we were dependent on the federal government to protect us and the FAA, we weren't really protected. So I would say there's lots of room for an alternative to a government monopolized FAA, and then we'd be just as safe.
But haven't we learned from Walter Reed and so many other scandals that actually private enterprise does worse? Corporations are actually worse than the government because they have absolutely no conscience?
Well, what makes you think the Veterans Association is private? I mean, this is a demonstration of what government-run medicine will be like. If you like government medicine, go to the veterans hospitals and you'll find out what it's like. I mean, as a physician and as one that had been trained in Veterans Hospital, most physicians and young doctors always knew what the quality of medical care was in many of our Veterans Hospital. We need to allow every veteran to have have decent health care, but we should permit him and pay for it to allow him to go to the doctor that he wants to go to and not make him stand in lines to get second-class care in some of our VA hospitals.
Okay, I appreciate that input and food for thought. Congressman Ron Paul, everybody. Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you.
I could hear an applause.
Home run. Home run territory.
Even with the FAA?
Oh, yeah.
Even with the FAA?
Thank you.
Freedom, we will lift our voice and let freedom ring. Let freedom ring.
Don Luskin, who's your pro-stock market candidate?
I mean this in all seriousness, Larry. Ron Paul.
Of the serious contenders this evening, Pat, is there one who adheres closest to your conception of classic conservatism?
I think the closest, candidly, is probably Ron Paul, who is a pro-life libertarian who does not vote for big spending, who opposed the Medicare expansion, who opposed No Child Left Behind, who opposed the war in Iraq, and he was the libertarian candidate for president years ago.
From MSNBC and Politico.com, this is a Decision 2008 special, the GOP Presidential Candidates Debate from the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library in Simi Valley, California.
Congressman Paul, you voted against the war. Why are all your fellow Republicans up here wrong?
That's a very good question, and you might ask the question, why are 70% of the American people now wanting us out of there, and why did the Republicans do so poorly last year? So I would suggest that we should look at foreign policy. I'm suggesting very strongly that we should have a foreign policy of non-intervention, the traditional American foreign policy and a Republican foreign policy. Throughout the 20th century, the Republican Party benefited from a non-interventionist foreign policy. Think of how Eisenhower came in to stop the Korean War. Think of how Nixon was elected to stop the mess in Vietnam. How did we win the election in the year 2000? We talked about a humble foreign policy, no nation building, don't police the world. That is a conservative, it's a Republican, it's a pro-American, it follows the founding fathers, and besides, it follows the Constitution. I tried very hard to solve this problem before we went to war by saying, declare war if you want to go to war, fight it and win it, but don't get into it for political reasons or to enforce UN resolutions or pretend the Iraqis were a national threat to us.
Congressman Paul, Pete from Rochester Hills, Michigan, wants to ask you this. If you were president, would you work to phase out the IRS?
Immediately.
That's what they call a softball.
And you can only do that if you change our ideas about what the role of government ought to be. If you think the government has to take care of us from cradle to grave, and if you think our government should police the world and spend hundreds of billions of dollars on a foreign policy that we cannot manage, you can't get rid of the IRS. But if you want to lower taxes, and if you don't want the government to quit printing the money to come up with the shortfall and cause all the inflation, you have to change policy.
Dr. Paul, how do you reconcile this moral leadership kind of role of conservatism with the very libertarian strain of conservatism, the Barry Goldwater conservatism that you represent? How do you put together what he just said with what you believe in a unified national purpose?
Well, you do it by an understanding what the goal of government ought to be. If the goal of government is to be the policeman of the world, you lose liberty. And if the goal is to promote liberty, you can unify all segments. The freedom message brings us together. It doesn't divide us. I believe that when we overdo our military aggressiveness, what it does, it actually weakens our national defense. I mean, we stood up to the Soviets. They had 40,000 nuclear weapons. Now we're fretting day in and day and night about third world countries that have no army, navy, or air force, and we're getting ready to go to war. But the principle, the moral principle, is that of defending liberty and minimizing the scope of government. And
I'm sorry, we have to go on. We have to go on. We have Mrs. Reagan here. The camera will not focus on her, but I will tell you, it will now focus on you. Mrs. Reagan wants to expand federal funding of embryonic stem cell research. Will that progress under your administration? Dr. Paul, yes or no on federal funding?
Programs like this are not authorized under the Constitution. The trouble with this, issues like this is, in Washington, we either prohibit it or subsidize it. Right. And the market should deal with it and the states should deal with it.
Okay, let's start with an enjoyable down the line, okay? I want each candidate to mention a tax he'd like to cut in addition to the Bush tax cuts, keeping them in effect.
Well, in my first week, I already got rid of the income tax. So my second week, I would get rid of the inflation tax. It's a tax that nobody talks about. We live way beyond our means with a foreign policy we can't afford and an entitlement system that we have encouraged. We print money for it, the value of the money goes down, and poor people pay higher prices. That is a tax. It's a transfer of wealth from the poor and the middle class to Wall Street. Wall Street's doing quite well, but the inflation tax is eating away at the middle class of this country. We need to get rid of the inflation tax with sound money.
Congressman Paul, Carrie from Connecticut asks, do you trust the mainstream media?
Some of them, but I trust the internet a lot more, and I trust the freedom of expression, and that's why we should never interfere with the internet. That's why I have never voted to regulate the internet, even when there's the temptation to put bad things on the internet. Regulation of bad and good on the internet should be done differently. But no, there's every reason to believe that we have enough freedom in this country to have freedom of expression, and that's what is important. And whether or not we trust the mainstream or not, I think you pick and choose. There are some friends and some aren't so friendly.
Thank you, Doctor. Dr. Paul.
I am absolutely opposed to a national ID card. This is a total contradiction of what a free society is all about. The purpose of government is to protect the secrecy and the privacy of all individuals, not the secrecy of government. We don't need a national ID card.
Seriously, would it be good for America to have Bill Clinton back living in the White House? Dr. Paul.
I am known for sticking to principle and not flip-flopping. I voted to impeach him, so hardly do I want him back in the White House.
How will you be different in any way from President George W. Bush?
I certainly would continue on my earlier theme that foreign policy needs to be changed. Mr. Republican Robert Taft, we have a statute of him in Washington. He advocated the same foreign policy that I advocate. I would work very hard to protect the privacy of American citizens, being very, very cautious about warrantless searches, and I would guarantee that I would never abuse habeas corpus.
And a Fox News alert for you now, less than 5 hours and counting to the big debate tonight right here on Fox. But I got to tell you, I have never seen so many viewer emails urging us to get a candidate on our air as I have with this particular gentleman. Our mailbox is consistently flooded with these requests. With us now is Republican Congressman Ron Paul of Texas. Congressman, you must have some very loyal fans.
Well, that's good. That's what you need in a campaign.
Okay, well, you got your chance. You're in a debate form right now, but you're nowhere in the polls. Polls don't mean anything, I know. How are you going to stand out tonight?
Well, I guess just telling the truth like I did last time, and we did very well. I think straightforward answers will serve me well. I think we face a lot of problems, and I've talked about them for a good many years. I've talked about why we shouldn't have gone to the war and why we should end the war. I've talked about the financial conditions. I don't think this country can do well borrowing nearly $3 billion a day from places like Japan and China to service our account deficit. And we're leaving a $60 trillion obligation to the next generation. So this country's in serious financial trouble. And besides, although the market today was excited about good news on inflation, I saw some bad news in that. I mean, 5% inflation rate, and that's probably less than 2% or so of what's really happening. American people are sick and tired of inflation when they go buy their gasoline or pay their medical bills. So we have some serious
you can't,
financial
Congressman.
problems.
I mean, we've got a pretty good economy going here, right? I mean, we've got productivity soaring. We've got retail sales that are strong. We've got corporate earnings that for the 19th quarter are up double digit. We've got a market chasing highs. I mean, this isn't happening in a vacuum, right?
Yeah, that's nice, but when you have to borrow, my personal finances would be very good if I borrowed $1 million every month, but someday the bills will become due. And the bills will come due in this country, and then we'll have to pay for it. We can't afford
Congressman,
this war,
did you say
we can't
this?
afford the entitlement
Did you
system.
say this 10 years ago when the numbers were similarly strong and we were still borrowing a great deal then?
That's right. That means the dollar bubble is much bigger than ever. And
so what do you say is going to what's going to happen?
We've had the NASDAQ bubble collapse already. We have the housing bubble is in the middle of a collapse, so the dollar bubble will collapse as well.
If you became president, Congressman, what's some of the tough medicine you would give us?
Well, I think we should live within our means. I think we should balance the budget. I think we could do that by bringing our troops home and saving hundreds of billions of dollars on a foreign policy of interventionism. We should go back to the old right position, not the neoconservative position. We shouldn't be adding new entitlement programs. We should live within our means. And
would you rescind, sir, the president's tax cuts, let them expire in 2010?
No, heavens no. We need greater tax cuts. We don't need to rescind tax cuts. We need to reduce taxes a lot more. And we can only do that if we change our attitude about the entitlement system and foreign policy. We cannot run an empire and police the world and not raise taxes. And if you don't raise taxes, you just print the money, and that's another tax on the poor and the middle class, because that's who gets injured by a depreciating currency. So it's back to the old story. We should have a government that lives within the bounds of the Constitution. It is not authorized to do most of what we do in Washington, and certainly we can't afford it. And as long as they trust the dollar, we can get away with it. But there is a day, and we're in the middle of a dollar that is sliding on international markets, and it's going to continue to slide.
So what about?
It may crash one of these days.
All right. What about Social Security? You talk about entitlement programs, Medicare. Do we need them?
Well, the only way you can survive by taking care of the people we've taught to be dependent is to change the foreign policy. Because, yes, we should have a transition period, and young people should certainly be given a chance to get out of Social Security. You should give people over 65 the option on their medical savings account. They're not even allowed to have a medical savings account. If they're unhappy with Medicare, they're forced to be in it. It's a monopoly, government monopoly. So no, we should have choices. We should have market choices always. And as long as it's forced into the government system, you're going to have inefficiencies. And that's what we're suffering from today.
All right. Well, Congressman, if you say even some of this stuff tonight, you're going to create fireworks. Very good seeing you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next on Special Report, Fox News is live at the Coker Center in Columbia, South Carolina, where later tonight 10 GOP candidates square off for the Fox News First in the South presidential debate.
If you're one of the minor candidates, or what you consider the minor candidates right now, how do you punch through in it?
One way to do that, of course, is to take on, in some way, one of the major candidates. Now, so far, that hasn't happened in any of these debates, really on either side.
I think Iraq will be a dominant issue. It's the issue of our era, and there's going to be a lot of questions about that.
As Fox reports live from Columbia, South Carolina, demonstrators for all the candidates are out, proving to be a blockbuster night.
You Decide 2008. The First in the South Republican Presidential Candidates Debate. Live from the Coker Center on the campus of the University of South Carolina.
Congressman Paul, you're one of 6 House Republicans who back in 2002 voted against authorizing President Bush to use force in Iraq.
In 2002, I offered an amendment to international relations to declare war, up or down, and nobody voted for the war. And my argument there was, if we want to go to war and if we should go to war, the Congress should declare it. We don't go to war like we did in Vietnam and Korea, because the wars never end. And I argued the case and made the point that it would be a quagmire if we go in. Ronald Reagan in 1983 sent Marines into Lebanon, and he said he would never turn tail and run. A few months later, the Marines were killed, 241 were killed, and the Marines were taken out. And Reagan addressed this subject in his memoirs. And he says, I said I would never turn tail and run. He says, but I never realized the irrationality of Middle Eastern politics, and he changed his policy there. We need the courage of a Ronald Reagan.
Brian from Fort Wayne asks this question via the internet, a question about controlling government spending. Congressman Paul, can you tell me 3 federal programs you consider wasteful and would eliminate?
I'd start with the departments. Department of Education, Department of Energy, Department of Homeland Security. We've started with, the Republicans put in the Department of Homeland Security. It's a monstrous type of bureaucracy. It was supposed to be streamlining our security, and it's unmanageable. I mean, just think of the efficiency of FEMA in its efforts to take care of the floods and the hurricanes. So yes, there's a lot of things that we can cut, but we can't cut anything until we change our philosophy about what government should do. If you think we can continue to police the world and spend hundreds of billions of dollars overseas and spend hundreds of billions of dollars running a welfare state, an entitlement system that has accumulated $60 trillion worth of obligations, and think that we can run the economy this way, we spend so much money now that we have to borrow nearly $3 billion a day from foreigners to take care of our consumption. And we can't afford that. We can't afford it in the government. We can't afford it as a nation. So tax reform should come, but spending cuts have to come by changing our attitude, what government ought to be doing for us.
You would eliminate the Department of Homeland Security in the midst of a war, sir?
Well, I think we should not go to more bureaucracy. It didn't work. We were spending $40 billion on security prior to 9/11, and they had all the information they needed there to deal with the threat. And it was inefficiency. So what do? We add a gigantic bureaucracy, which they're still working on trying to put it together. And a tremendous amount of increase in funds. So I don't think that the Republican position ought to be more bureaucracy. I mean, why did we double the size of the Department of Education?
Congressman Paul, I believe you are the only man on the stage who opposes the war in Iraq, who would bring the troops home as quickly as almost immediately, sir. Are you out of step with your party? Is your party out of step with the rest of the world? If either of those is the case, why are you seeking its nomination?
Well, I think the party has lost its way because the conservative wing of the Republican Party always advocated a non-interventionist foreign policy. Senator Robert Taft didn't even want to be in NATO. George Bush won the election in year 2000 campaigning on a humble foreign policy, no nation building, no policing of the world. Republicans were elected to end the Korean War. The Republicans were elected to end the Vietnam War. There's a strong tradition of being anti-war in the Republican Party. It is the constitutional position. It is the advice of the founders to follow a non-interventionist foreign policy. Stay out of entangling alliances. Be friends with countries. Negotiate and talk with them and trade with them. Just think of the tremendous improvement relationships with Vietnam. We lost 60,000 men. We came home in defeat. Now we go over there and invest in Vietnam. So there's a lot of merit to the advice of the founders and following the Constitution. And my argument is that we shouldn't go to war so carelessly. When we do, the wars don't end.
Congressman, you don't think that changed with the 9/11 attack, sir?
What changed?
The non-interventionist policies.
No, non-intervention was a major contributing factor. Have you ever read about the reasons they attacked us? They attack us because we've been over there. We've been bombing Iraq for 10 years. We've been in the Middle East. I think Reagan was right. We don't understand the irrationality of Middle Eastern politics. So right now we're building an embassy in Iraq that's bigger than the Vatican. We're building 14 permanent bases. What would we say here if China was doing this in our country or in the Gulf of Mexico? We would be objecting. We need to look at what we do from the perspective of what would happen if somebody else did it to us.
Are you suggesting we invited the 9/11 attack, sir?
I'm suggesting that we listen to the people who attacked us and the reason they did it. And they are delighted that we're over there because Osama bin Laden has said, I am glad you're over on our sand because we can target you so much easier. They have already now, since that time, have killed 3,400 of our men, and I don't think it was necessary.
Wendell, may I make a comment on that? That's really an extraordinary statement. That's an extraordinary statement as someone who lived through the attack of September 11, that we invited the attack because we were attacking Iraq. I don't think I've ever heard that before, and I've heard some pretty absurd explanations for September 11. And I would ask the congressman to withdraw that comment and tell us that he didn't really mean that.
I believe very sincerely that the CIA is correct when they teach and talk about blowback. When we went into Iran in 1953 and installed the Shah, yes, there was blowback. The reaction to that was the taking of our hostages, and that persists. And if we ignore that at our own risk. That if we think that we can do what we want around the world and not incite hatred, then we have a problem. They don't come here to attack us because we're rich and we're free. They come and they attack us because we're over there. I mean, what would we think if we were, if other foreign countries were doing that to us?
Can I have 30 seconds, please?
No, wait a second. We all get 30 seconds.
They are coming.
We all want 30 seconds.
The idea that we have to sacrifice so much under the guise of what is necessary to protect us from terrorism. We need to understand why terrorists are anxious to come here. People say, Ron, you're completely wrong. And I hear this on radio shows that might agree with our message completely, and they say, we got to go over there and fight them there because we don't want them over here. I think there's a great fallacy in that logic, mainly because they came over here because we were over there. Matter of fact, if you read carefully what Osama bin Laden, our former partner in crime, says, he says, we want you over there. He couldn't believe we would go over there and invade 2 Muslim countries. His recruiting has gone up spectacularly. There never had been any Al-Qaeda in Iraq. Now they have free reign in Iraq. They don't want that war to end. I mean, the worst thing that could happen to the Al-Qaeda is if we walked out of there. But they want us over there. They don't have to come over here. They can pick us off over there. There's one reason why the enemy, and they are our enemies, want to kill us, and that is occupation. We occupy their territory. It would be like the Chinese had their navy in the Gulf of Mexico and had bases in New Hampshire and in Texas, and they think we wouldn't pull out our gun and do some shooting. But too often the American people won't see it in that light. We are good and wonderful and perfect, and we are only going to deliver our goodness to them. We have 2 suggestions to the people that we try to do so much good. We go over and we tell them, you do it our way or we're going to bomb you. And then if they do it our way, we subsidize them. What about the alternative of neither bombing nor subsidizing and trying to get along with people and talking to people and trading with people? The best demonstration of the advice that the founders gave us is Vietnam. What a tragedy. 60,000 deaths, and then we lose. We walk out. It was illegal, unconstitutional, undeclared war. We walk away from it, and what has happened? The country has become unified. Was there a domino theory and they all become communists? Communism failed, and they're westernized, and we trade with them. We're over there now investing there. I mean, it's so dramatic, and yet we never seem to learn. This message is powerful, the message of freedom, that of the free market, and allow people to run their own lives. You know, I believe that one of our problems has been that we have had presidents that want to do too much. And the people in this country like a strong president. And I got to thinking, well, how can I run for an office like this and say, I want to be a weak president? But you know what? The answer to that is we should have a strong president. Strong enough to resist the temptation of taking power that a president shouldn't have.
Republican presidential candidate Rudy Giuliani is being assigned some summer reading. Fellow candidate, 9-term congressman from Texas, Ron Paul, thinks the former mayor of New York City needs to bone up on U.S. policy in the Middle East. You might not be too familiar with Paul. His name barely makes a blip in the early polling, but he did square off with Giuliani at last week's debate in South Carolina. Paul had said that U.S. policies in the Middle East contributed to the attacks of 9/11. Giuliani dismissed him and that theory and received a round of applause from the audience. Well, that's not sitting so well with Paul. So today, the congressman came out with a reading list for Giuliani. The titles include Dying to Win, which looks at the motives of suicide bombers, Blowback, which examines U.S. foreign policy, the 9/11 Commission report, and Imperial Hubris by Michael Scheuer, the former head of the CIA's bin Laden unit. This is not exactly Oprah's book club we're talking here. The question then is this: is Republican presidential candidate Ron Paul out of line, giving the former mayor of New York, Rudy Giuliani, a summer reading assignment on the history of American foreign policy in the Middle East? Ed writes from Texas, not at all. If Mr. Giuliani believes Iraq's the central front in the war on terror, he should spend more time studying our enemy and less time profiting from the events of 9/11. Our enemy's decentralized, geographically dispersed. If Mr. Giuliani doesn't understand that, then he shouldn't be our president. Richard in Alabama, I was disgusted during the GOP debate the way Congressman Paul's reasoned academic responses to complex issues were degraded by Rudy Giuliani and turned into applause points. Paul was using his brain when he asked us to review our policies in the Middle East and how they affect the Muslim world. Giuliani simplified it into a lie that Paul said we were responsible for 9/11. JC writes, not at all, just a little tip from an old pro. Rudy got caught with his top button undone. Lewis in Seattle, not at all out of line. Like the old phrase goes, the truth will set you free. America is now imprisoned by its own willful ignorance of the root causes of Middle East aggression toward the U.S. Books like these should be required reading for any high-level politician. Jeremy in California, Giuliani's response to Paul and the subsequent applause by the audience just goes to prove how ignorant and arrogant we are here. That's a book list all Americans would be well served to read. Richard in Seattle, as a Democrat, I found Representative Paul's comments closer to mine than any other candidate, Democrat or Republican. And as an ex-New Yorker, I'm quite sure Rudy won't read anything that he's told to read.
Joining us now, Texas Congressman and presidential candidate Ron Paul. That was quite a moment between you and Rudolph Giuliani. I wonder if that had gone on a little longer, just what might have happened in that little mini debate within the debate that happened tonight.
Maybe he'll debate me on foreign policy. I'd be delighted to debate him on foreign policy, where we each got to explain our positions.
The question that kept coming up for you was that you are not saying the same things the other Republican candidates are saying.
That's true.
You seem to be not in sync with what the party itself is saying. Why run as a Republican? And if you don't get the nomination, would you run as an independent?
Well, the majority of the American people don't like the war. And I want to be president of the country, not president of the Republican Party.
But you got to get the nomination first.
Yeah, but the party itself has to have a position that's attractive to the entire country. We lost last year's election on the war issue. Most people believe that to be the case.
But if you didn't get the nomination, would you run as an independent?
No. No,
you would not?
No, I'm not planning on that. No, I don't intend to do that.
You call yourself, you ran as Libertarian Party candidate in 1988. Yet you call yourself pro-life. Where in the Constitution does it say, for example, that you can make laws restricting a woman's right to choose? If you want to be a constitutionalist, shouldn't the government stay totally out of the abortion
Well, I think
issue?
the federal government should.
What about the state government?
What?
What about states?
It's up to the state government, because the state governments, we don't dictate to the states. Protection of life is one of the important issues of government. If you can't protect life, how can you protect liberty?
But most libertarians, and I know you lean libertarian, would say the government, women should have a right to choose. The government, even state government, should say out of it, you should not restrict a person's right to make that choice. That's what most libertarians would say.
No, but all libertarians believe that you should never use a force to bring about changes, and they reject an act of aggression. A fetus is alive, it's human, and has legal rights. If you kill it,
Ron,
you have committed an act of aggression.
I want to go back to this exchange you had with Mayor Giuliani here for just a second. Are you suggesting the United States of America caused the attack on 9/11?
No, I think that's a cop-out. When people imply that, what you're saying is that if you don't endorse my foreign policy, you're un-American, you're unpatriotic.
I never said anything like that. I don't say you're suggesting.
No, but I think that was the point in the debate, that if I didn't endorse this foreign policy, you turn it around, or he turned it around.
I'm not saying that, but what specifically then are you saying? Are you suggesting that our policies are causing the hatred of people that would cause them to want to kill us?
I think it contributes significantly to it, and this is exactly what our CIA tells us. And anybody who's done any research on this has found out.
What have we done to cause the attack? What did America do to cause the attack on 9/11?
Okay, the Americans didn't do anything to cause it, but policies over many years caused and elicited hatred toward us, so somebody was willing to commit suicide. For instance, the occupation with our military troops on their holy land in Saudi Arabia, bombing a Muslim country for 10 years, putting on sanctions that killed hundreds of thousands of people. So that caused an anger.
By the way, keep texting your votes for who you think is the winner of tonight's debate. Just text your vote to 36988. We're coming up on close to 20,000 votes, and the percentages are still staying pretty consistent. In first place, Ron Paul, 29%. Mitt Romney closing in on 27%. In third place, Rudy Giuliani, 16%.
Our campaign is all about freedom, prosperity, and peace.
Come on, people, gather around him. He's got a message, hope for us all. Young and old folks are standing together, calling for freedom, calling for love. Citizens are joining each other now. We spread the message of freedom. They let the doctor know. We make a vow, shout it out. Live free or die. The message of freedom. Live free or die. We're not just the internet. We're not just the internet. We're not just the internet. We're bigger than the internet. We're bigger than the internet. Ron Paul! 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 We love you, Dr. Paul! We love you, Dr. Paul! We love you, Dr. Paul!
I support Ron Paul because of his major stand on enforcing the Constitution.
Ron Paul for freedom. I think Ron's great. He's going to save the country.
Thank you for giving us hope.
We are really witnessing the true beginning of the Ron Paul revolution here in New Hampshire.
If he wins president, I'm going to get a portrait of his face tattooed on my back.
Go Ron Paul 2008, Ron Paul for president, the Ron Paul revolution. Let's do it. All right. Thank you. All right.
I'd like to ask each candidate to, in one short sentence, about 5 seconds or so, to introduce themselves to the voters of New Hampshire.
I'm Ron Paul. I'm a congressman from Texas, serving in my 10th term. I am the champion of the Constitution.
Question regarding the government in Iraq. Everyone's talking about pull our troops out, pull our troops out. Well, considering they've lived under a dictatorship for the last 30 years or so, what are we going to do to make sure they have a government in place before we do pull our troops out and they're able to help themselves? Otherwise, we're just putting them in a position to accept another terrorist leader.
That's right.
Congressman Paul.
That's right.
Well, we've had 4 years to do this, and it hasn't worked. The biggest incentive for them to take upon themselves the responsibility is just for us to leave. We don't need to lose 100 men and women every month, 1,000, more than 1,000 per year. And so you want it done, you want them to take over, you've got to give them an incentive. So I think we should immediately stop patrolling the streets. That's a policeman's job. It's not the work of the Army. We're not fighting a military battle. We're in a different type of warfare right now. So the sooner we recognize that, the sooner we can make sure that no more Americans will die. We have a lot of goodness in this country, and we should promote it, but never through the barrel of a gun. We should do it by setting good standards, motivating people, and have them want to emulate us. But you can't enforce our goodness like the neocons preach with an armed force. It doesn't work. Woodrow Wilson was telling us about that in promoting democracy a long time ago. It doesn't work, and we have to admit it.
Thank you, Congressman. Let me bring Congressman Paul. What's the most pressing moral issue in the United States right now?
I think it is the acceptance just recently that we now promote preemptive war. I do not believe that's part of the American tradition. We in the past have always declared war in the defense of our liberties or go to aid somebody, but now we have accepted the principle of preemptive war. We have rejected the just war theory of Christianity. And now, tonight, we hear that we're not even willing to remove from the table a preemptive nuclear strike against the country that has done no harm to us directly and is no threat to our national security. I mean, we have to come to our senses about this issue of war and preemption and go back to traditions and our Constitution and defend our liberties and defend our rights, but not to think that we can change the world by force of arms and to start wars.
Thank you, Congressman.
Join each other now. Let's spread the message of freedom. We make a call, shout it out now. We want the message of freedom.
I am an advocate, a very strong advocate of following very strictly the rule of law, the Constitution of the United States. Would be ashamed of us for what we're putting up with. Join us in this great campaign for freedom and liberty. Thank you very much.
There's so many people networking on the internet. There's so many people networking on the internet that believe in your message so much. It's so valuable to us.
Keep it going.
Well, we will. We will.
Come on, people, gather around him. He's got a message, hope for us all. Young and old folks are standing together, calling for freedom, calling for Ron Paul. Citizens all, join each other now. Let's spread the message of freedom. We make a call, shout it out now.
I watched the Republican debate, and I saw this guy, Ron Paul. He's my new hero.
Start the clock.
What he was saying was we should listen to our enemies. We would actually make ourselves safer. You just never heard this logic from someone who's actually going to run the country. Got Ben Affleck here. They're screaming for Ron Paul. We're going to bring out Ron Paul in a little while. And Ben Affleck. Okay, thank you for being here. Look at that. Now,
that's nice.
Do you have any mixed feelings about getting such an ovation from such a liberal audience?
Well, not really. I mean, I think a politician always likes applause.
Yeah. Well, we had you on about, I think it was late March, and I think we just scratched the surface, and that's really my fault. I should have scratched it more, but after I saw you in the debate, I said, you know what, this is a person who I really want to talk to a lot more. There's so many things I want to ask you, but I know you just got back yesterday. You were in Washington at the National Press Club, and I thought this was great. You presented Rudy Giuliani, I guess he wasn't there, but with a reading list.
Right.
And Rudy Giuliani, who took you on in this debate and pretends to be such a terrorism fighter, he really hasn't read anything about it, has he?
No, it looks like he skipped the 9/11 investigation. You know, he didn't read that report because it sort of supported my position on that.
And what of the things that you suggested he read do you think are most important that he be aware of?
Well, I think it's been known for quite a few decades that our foreign policy has what the CIA calls blowback. It has unintended consequences. You can go back to 1953 when we put the Shah into power, or us supporting Osama bin Laden and radicalizing the Islamics to go after the Soviets, and that comes back as blowback. Our support for Saddam Hussein in the 1980s, and this comes back to haunt us. And that's why I have been very attractive and very supportive of what I call a non-interventionist foreign policy. Mind our own business and stay out of the internal affairs of other nations.
Right after 9/11, I remember when we finally, television shows got back on the air. Of course, I got fired. But the other ones that were still able to...
the other shows.
Yeah, the other shows.
Survived, yeah.
I said the wrong thing, too. But the big question, I remember, was, why do they hate us? Remember that? We had about a week when we were all, why do they hate us? And then we just forgot that and went, they're evil. They're evil, we're good. We don't... Why do you think America is so dumb? Was it always this dumb?
I hope not all of us.
No, not all of us.
We're Americans.
Yes, right. But how do you get this smart? I mean, come on. I mean, if America was a smarter country, wouldn't you be leading in the polls?
Let's hope so. And that plus, if you can raise $100 million, money talks these days. So.
I've said before that, when you're dealing with somebody who is your enemy, and we do have an enemy, but I wouldn't call them terrorists. I would call them Muslim fundamentalists. I don't think everyone who attacks us is a terrorist, certainly not in Iraq. But you have to either make them fear you or love you. It used to be America was loved around the world. We gave up.
I don't know when was that? It was like 1777. About a year.
When Kennedy went anywhere around the world, he was beloved.
It was Jackie that they liked.
Clinton, when he went around the world, was beloved. People were in love with him, and he liked some of them too.
I think what we should look for is respect. That's what we need, and that's what we don't have. And they look down upon us because we impose on them. I have no problems with this theoretical position of the neocons to spread the goodness of America, but just not with force. We should spread it by setting a good example, getting our house in order, making sure civil liberties are defended here. Then, when we have a free and prosperous economy and everybody's doing well and everybody's getting medical care, then they'll want to emulate us. But there's no way it'll work to pretend that we have goodness. It's so good that the Wilsonian, actually this is old stuff, Wilson, make the world safe for democracy.
A Democrat.
It hasn't worked, and force does not work.
Yeah.
Persuasion does.
And I know you've said before that you're the most conservative member of Congress. You are really more Republican than they are. What? There are the Republicans. What happened to your party?
They've lost their way. And they tend to be critical of what I'm saying, but I think it hurts. But I think I'm on safe grounds historically that Republicans, at least, they still talk about small government, don't they, and individual freedom.
They talk about it.
But they don't. So therefore, I think in time, the people will wake up. And last year they didn't do too well. 1994, they spoke a strong message. They won an election, and they thought they were going to work for smaller government. And look, and even on the foreign policy, how did George Bush get elected? Strongly critical of Clinton,
right.
Nation building and policing the world, and this is what he pushed. The peace candidate always wins. Just think about it. Even before World War I and World War II, we're going to keep you out of the war. Eisenhower wins and Nixon wins. What about Barry Goldwater and the Johnson campaign? I mean, even though Johnson was promoting the war and spreading it, Barry Goldwater was turned into the guy that was going to unleash the bomb. So the
Right.
peace is a powerful message, especially after the war has been going on and the people wake up and realize how many people die and how much it costs. And that's why I think the people are really ready for a message that says we don't have to be in this mess. Logic tells us that we can make a better world in a much easier way than causing wars.
Well, I hope you're out there delivering it. I know that some people have tried to get you out of the Republican debates and to just make you go up to the blackboard and write 1,000 times they hate us for our freedom.
That's right.
But you won't do that.
But we have Mr. Giuliani studying tonight. He's home reading all those books. And he's going to come back and he's going to apologize to me. And he's going to say, I'm sorry, Ron, I just didn't know that that's the way foreign policy works. I didn't even know that you just can't blame Americans for our foreign policy, that it's the policy that's at fault. It's not the fault of the Americans who are victimized by these evil, monstrous, murderous people who come over and kill us. It's the fault of the policymakers. It's policy that counts.
From your lips to God's ears. Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you.
I appreciate you coming out here.
Okay.
You keep on it.
Thank you.
Ron Paul, everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is this my imagination? Or is something really happening here? All across our nation, people rejecting the use of fear, excusing tyranny for reason, or protection from an enemy at home. Thank you very much. We want to take the good and make it wrong. We got to make a change for the better. It's already way too late. But at the bottom now,
We were at the airport to greet Ron Paul yesterday, and one of the gentlemen that I was introduced to said that the reason he came is because he saw a Ron Paul banner being hung from one of the freeway overpasses. So I think that the word is starting to get out about who Ron Paul is. People are starting to go online to research and watch videos. And so we're going to just continue to do that kind of guerrilla marketing and attract more people to our meetup group, get people involved in a grassroots campaign. It's going very well. You know, we started out with 15 people about 30 days ago, and now we're up to 150. So that's quite an impressive feat.
Actually, I just learned about Ron Paul a few months ago from her, actually.
Thanks to this guy, actually.
Because I was just looking online, and I just typed it because I wanted to get involved with the campaign, but I didn't have money or time, really. And I found the meetup group, and I was like, shut up, this is amazing. So I showed up, and obviously we did a good thing.
We're
we got
growing
here.
every week. Next meeting, we're going to have to move to a bigger location.
We are Americans, divided not by race, gender, education, occupation, geography, religion, or national origin, but united by the knowledge that freedom improves the well-being of every person. Never have the hopes of so many Americans, separated by vast social, cultural, and political differences, rested on the shoulders of one man with one message.
There's a great man we can count on, who stands far above the crowd, leading the cause for freedom. We have someone on our side now. We the people are ready, with our backs up against the wall. In this time of great trouble, our nation really needs Ron Paul. He's hope for America, hope for America, hope for America now. "2008 is coming, and we've got a choice. Sit back and bite our tongues, or we could use our voice. Speak out on the things we all really need to hear, like honesty in our government and eliminating fear. Good news is happening, check it out when you can. Ron Paul from Texas, he's our president man.